I got to be honest, the Kung Fu TV series shot here, I personally thought it was offensive in that we have so many good Chinese, Canadian actors, actresses, stunt people living here in Vancouver. I know that because a lot of them supported me on Beyond Redemption. And if you look at the cast of the Kung Fu TV series, they're predominantly from the USA. Now, no disrespect to them as actors, actresses, professionals. I respect them as that, but they didn't need to come up here. They're not a name that's selling the show. It's just that Hollywood stereotype. Oh, we'll get all our people out of LA because we really don't think the Canadians are good enough, or whatever the rationale is.
Hello and welcome to Off the Lot. The film industry is changing fast, and if you want to make movies, it's time to become your own gatekeeper. If you've got a vision and the drive to make it happen, this podcast is for you.
We're your hosts, Ken Kabatov and Anthony Yap, and every week we dive into the hustle, challenges, and strategies of independent filmmaking. We talk to directors, producers, and industry pros about what it really takes to get your film made on your own terms.
Let's dive in.
Welcome back to this week of Off the Lot. It is Anthony again. I'm solo hosting this time, but I do have a fantastic guest with me this week. With me this week is going to be Bruce Fontaine. He is a Vancouver-based filmmaker who got his start by moving to Hong Kong in 1988, which would by many be considered the golden age of Hong Kong cinema, where he worked as an actor and stunt performer alongside Jackie Chan, Stephen Chow, and Sammo Hung. He became one of the most prolific, what we would call guaylo bad guys of the era, known for his martial arts background and exceptional kicking ability. Bruce returned to Vancouver in 1996 and transitioned into stunts, fight choreography, stunt coordination, and motion capture work for Electronic Arts. He made his directorial debut in 2016 with Beyond Redemption, which was made for, you can correct me, Bruce, but $45,000?
That's correct.
And he is here today to talk about Ruthless Bastards, which is his second feature and is getting its Canadian debut very shortly. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Anthony. I'm happy to be here.
It's fantastic to get you on talking about Ruthless Bastards. Now, full disclosure, I helped out a small part on the making of this film. Bruce approached me to work as the production manager on Ruthless Bastards in 2023, which is when we went to production on it. And so I have a little bit of intimate knowledge of what some of the things that the shenanigans on set, if you will, and in getting ready. But I want to hear it mostly from Bruce's mouth, because Bruce, you made this film basically during the writers and actors strike.
That is correct.
And that definitely played a part in some of the interesting matters that we had to deal with while making the film. But why don't we just get into it a little bit more? Tell us a little bit about what Ruthless Bastards is about.
Okay, well, first of all, I would say that you didn't really play a small part. I'd say you played quite a large part, but I digress. Yeah, so where did Ruthless Bastards start? I had done, as you mentioned, a film back in 2016 called Beyond Redemption. I was trying to get some other projects off the ground. I had a couple false starts. I went to the Hong Kong film market. Took a little while. We had a project that was going to work out. We had a possible Indian company as a co-production, and then COVID hit. And that kind of took the wind out of our sails. And then over in India, they were having their own issues. We had another project that I approached a new distributor with, a different one from our first distributor. And I had seen them at the Hong Kong film market. We struck it off. Unfortunately, we were still in the midst of COVID and things weren't really working out. Anyways, fast forward, a friend of mine was talking to me about some actors that he had access to, and they weren't going forward with their production. So I asked the individual if he could maybe steer me towards them, and that was initially Casper Van Dien and another actor. We had a project, Ruthless Bastards, kind of in the background, kicking around, so we retooled it, approached Casper. He was on board. I had some ideas about other cast, but anyways, we had trouble getting the other actor to play Casper's sidekick. And part of it had to do with these are guys who are kind of, cresting 50 and, heading towards 60. So they're dealing with, things that typical people deal with at that age. So the agent basically contacted me and said, hey, how about Sean Patrick Flannery? When he said that, pretty much the whole thing was born. My distributor loved the combination of Casper Van Dien and Sean Patrick Flannery and took that to a buyer in the States. We got a pre-sale. We had some equity from some investors here in Canada. Not a great deal, but enough to get it going. We worked on the rest of the cast. Parmesh Verma, who maybe a lot of people don't know, but he's a very popular actor and pop star from India that lives here. He's a permanent resident. I do a lot of networking. Had met the woman who would become Parmesh's sidekick, Hasleen Kaur, through a friend that used to be with ZTV, a big company in India. So I kept Hasleen in mind. As timing would have it, she happened to come back to Canada. One of the actresses that we were maybe going to get didn't quite work out. So yeah, so we ended up getting Hasleen. We got a fellow named Harsh Nagra, who's an Indian pop star. I'm quite good friends with his father. And then because of my time back in Hong Kong, there was an actress that has been residing in Canada. She's a Hong Kong actress named Teresa Lee. Teresa and I worked on my last film back in my Hong Kong days. So I'd always kept her in mind. And there, as it fate would have it, there was a part that I thought was really good for her. So I called her up, and she had been kind of semi-retirement because she had become a mom, but her son was now going to college. So life was a little different for her. So as time would have it, she said, yeah, I love it. Let's do it. After that, it was just assembling people who you well know. You know all the incriminating things. Alex Bopolov and Wai-Sun Chang. We worked with our distributor to figure out all the financing things that we needed to do, how to utilize tax credits, where to where to get the most value for your tax credits, if you will. So there were several months, and I think you came on board kind of somewheres in that mix. I would say you probably weren't so much involved with the tax credits as much as Alex and I were, but there was a lot of work to get this to come to life. There was also scheduling issues. Parmesh was bouncing between Canada and India. He was doing concert tours in India as we were trying to schedule things. And then, of course, we had to make it work for our Americans. Teresa is a BC resident, but she lives in Kamloops. So, there's a lot of little scheduling things. And then just, the actor strike hit. And then we had to get waivers. And that in itself was a bit of a struggle. I don't want to sound like I'm being opportunistic, but it worked out for us in terms of getting local cast and crew. Because there was, of course, less work between the writer strike and the actor strike. So I sometimes count that as a blessing for us. And as it was between people like yourself, my connections with the stunt community and the cast that I was able to bring on, I think between all of us, we got a really good crew. I think everyone was fantastic. The local actors that we got, I think were really, really good. We also had probably some of the best stunt people in Vancouver. I'd have to mention, of course, Brian Ho. Yeah, so we had a really great team. It all came together. And as you know, after some false starts and some worries about money, we had some issues with the cash flow, which I'm sure you know. But yeah, we went to camera, and if memory serves me, late October, early November.
Well, kind of hitting on that, like when the strike hit, you call it opportunistic. I mean, I think that is really one of the linchpins that helped bring this film together. I mean, one person's misfortune is another person's fortune. And the crew that you were able to assemble because of the strike was quite phenomenal. Like there were quite a few people who worked on this show who probably would have not been accessible at the budget level, right? Like you would probably argue that, like you mentioned Brian Ho, like Brian Ho he would go on to work on, Tron. He's a stunt coordinator in the Vancouver community that, is prolifically working all the time. I mean, that's not a person who's just available that easily. And your stunt performers, like just the people who came in to be stunt performers for the show, were all, I mean, these are some of the top stunt people in Vancouver. And arguably, I'd say in North America, but at the very least in the Lower Mainland. And it was really quite a who's who of who's in the stunt community who were out there every day, which was really kind of cool to see because, of course, not only was that great to have them there, but also because this is quite a fight heavy movie, which I'd like to get into. I mean, obviously this is a Canadian film written by a Canadian, directed by a Canadian, produced by Canadians, intellectual property owned by Canadians. But aside from your two leads, or your two leads were not Canadian, obviously, but you didn't have telefilm money. So you didn't finance this thing through the sort of normal traditional Canadian methods, if you will. I guess without getting into sort of confidential stuff, like how do you think a movie like this got put together in that way? Like obviously using tax credits and all these other things, but what about this film made it something that could be financed?
Okay. Yeah, we don't want to get too technical. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds. The thing I would say, number one, for example, people like Brian Ho, I've known him since he got started in the film industry. And Brian and other people like Brian, I've known for many years. So we had a lot of love, a lot of support. A lot of people came out just to help support this because they wanted to see what we were doing actually happen. The other thing, and this is something with my first film, I realized if I want to do this, I just have to take the initiative. I've actually had a couple kicks at the can, and I don't want to go into the telefilm thing too much, but I've had 3 kicks at the can, and it doesn't work out. There's lots of things we could discuss about telefilm and all that. It's not relevant. The main thing is I was persistent. We had a lot of love and support. A lot of the people that got involved wanted to do this project. They wanted to see it happen. And I'm pretty confident we'll probably be able to get the same type of people on board because I've got a lot of good friendships with, for example, people like Brian Ho, people like Wai Sun Chang, Alex, I hope yourself. So it was largely persistence and it's constant networking. That's all I do all the time. In fact, I don't want to say it in a way that sounds like I'm denigrating Canadians, but I tend to network outside the local circle. I tend to network with a lot of the what I call the hidden gems. There's a lot of Chinese film people that live here, actors, producers, so on. I know most all of them. There's a huge Indo-Canadian film community here that I think a lot of people, except maybe some of the people in crew, I think most Canadian film people don't realize that we've got a huge Indo-Canadian community. It's like a hidden gem, and I network with those people all the time, and my money was basically private investment, and it was just through constant networking.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like we can't hit on this enough, but it's not like, again, that you're coming at this blind. I mean, you come into this as Bruce Fontaine, the guy who did a lot of these Hong Kong films. So you've got all that connections also, like just in terms of the sheer film infrastructure of knowing, I mean, you're making an action film with stunt people, you're going to know all the stunt people. And that starts off with building a little bit of your credibility as, are you capable of pulling this off? I don't think there's a question that you would be able to pull that off. And like you said, it feels like it's something where you just constantly go out and have coffee and dim sum and all these other things with people as friends and building relationships that way, building partnerships and relationships through just people getting to know you and liking you and trusting that if they partner with you, you're going to look after their money, first of all, and you're going to look after their trust and deliver them something that is going to reward that. I think that's a fair enough comment to say. And just having worked with you for the last 2 or 3 years, I could say that's quite honestly how I view our relationship as well. It's a bit of a back and forth of, we know we are kind of carrying the same mantle of wanting to make fun projects, but also wanting to do them in a way that gets them actually completed, actually commercially viable, and rewards the trust that people put into us as filmmakers.
Yeah, I would yeah.
Kind of going back on that a little bit, you wrote the script. Did you write the script with these actors in mind? Or did you write it and then cast based on that?
Full disclosure, I had a co-writer with me, Verinder Jatu, so he did a lot of the heavy lifting. The thing I do with film, and this is what I did with the first film, Beyond Redemption, I believe in reverse engineering. I also believe in trying to figure out what's going to sell. A lot of people here, and I'm not denigrating people want to make art type films, but I want to make commercial films. I hope that they'll travel. I hope that they'll make money, but I reverse engineer. All the locations that you see in Ruthless Bastards, probably half of them we already had predetermined because we know the cost. We spent a lot of time, as you know, in what's called the cabin. And I had worked in that cabin a couple times in the past, and I always kept it in mind. So we had actually written it partly with the cabin in mind. We knew that parts of Langley would get us more tax credits. We also knew that certain areas are fairly easy to film in. Of course, you always encounter problems, but we knew certain areas would be easy to film in. My first film, we only paid for one location. Well, two, sorry. Everything was guerrilla shooting. Now, we didn't guerrilla shoot on Ruthless Bastards, but we figured out locations that we knew would work. We also figured out, and I want to phrase this correctly, we part of the thing with my films that I hope to do is I hope to not just be seen in Canada. Nothing wrong with just being seen in Canada, but I hope to have my film seen around the world. And that view partly comes from all the years I spent in Hong Kong. And many of the films that were made in Hong Kong back at that time, before China opened up, were made with an eye towards foreign territories, Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, etc. And with my experience here, I know there's a lot of what I call, again, the hidden gems. So we also wanted to incorporate people into our cast that we felt would, one, be able to travel better in terms of sales and also incorporate them in a meaningful way. So when we're coming up with the script, it's like, I just met Parmesh Verma recently. I can get him. I showed him the script. He loved it. So we kind of engineered it to work for someone of Indo-Canadian descent that would actually help us expand into those bigger markets. The same thing with Teresa. Teresa was an A-lister before she kind of entered into semi-retirement when she became a mom. And she's someone I had access to. So I thought, definitely, why not get Teresa? There's no guarantee, but it might help us. So we kind of engineered the script in a way that we know we could position Parmesh and Hasleen and Harjnagra in a meaningful way, position Teresa, and even so with the Russian character. So we wanted to make it kind of we wanted to try to take advantage of those elements that exist available to us. And we structured the script in such a way as to, incorporate that and hopefully make it a more commercially viable product that will, we hope, travel outside of just, say, Canada or Hollywood. No disrespect, but I think too many Canadians think Hollywood's the end all and be all. From my experience, having traveled a lot, there's a big world out there, and there's people who would like to see your movies, but you've got to make it appealing to them. And I see, why not put in some Hong Kong actresses or actors that live here, or add in some of the Indo-Canadian actors and actresses that live here. We actually have some of the biggest names in the Punjabi film industry right here in Greater Vancouver. We've got some of the top Hong Kong actors. Many of them are semi-retired, but they all live here in Vancouver. So that's kind of my thinking, is try to make a film that's ideally going to travel better, and at the same time trying to keep the budget tight, figuring out how to make the tax credits work, and figuring out how to make it work in such a way that distributors are going to say, yes, I like this. I think we could get sales.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. Like, you're building around these resources. It's not just about like having access to a cabin, for example, or having locations that you can get, but also, having that relationship with the cast that you are building and going, oh, okay, so I've got this, I've met this well-known Indian actor. Well, what can we do about that?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the interesting thing, I've been reading a lot of the reviews of the film, and one of the things that people keep singling out is the chemistry that Casper and Sean seem to have on set. Like, it really feels like they had a lot of fun making the film. Was that your experience with them? And what was your relationship with Casper and Sean throughout the making of the movie?
Okay. So, first of all, when we were developing this, originally we had Casper, and there was another actor that was looking at the script. And when it worked out that the other actor was not interested, he didn't want to play an older gentleman, Casper's agent had a talk with him and says, hey, Sean Patrick, I love Boondock Saints. It's one of my favorite films. And that's obviously one of Sean's more notable films. He's done a lot of other good films. He was Young Indiana Jones. He was in Suicide Kings, another favorite film of mine. But when he said Sean Patrick, and then he kind of elaborated and said, well, they're actually friends, and they've actually wanted to do something together. And I thought, well, we've got two actors, pros, right? And they're friends. I figured we're going to get some really good stuff out of this. Full disclosure, there were some struggles. I know now that when I do the contract negotiations, because one of the things we allowed in the contract for Sean was the right to rewrite his dialogue or have input, which is all good. But next time I'll put in a clause that say it has to be done before going to camera or 3 days before the intended rewrites impact, because Sean sometimes would ask for the rewrites at the end of the day going into the next day, as you may well know. So that was a struggle. But to be fair, I think not all, but a lot of Sean's rewrites, I actually thought added something. Sean is American, and it came off with a little more Americana feel. And this film, we're not trying to position it in the market as a Canadian film. It's just a film for your entertainment. It's a popcorn film. And with Sean's input, I looked at it and went, okay, this definitely has some Americana. He added a couple lines referencing movies. There's a scene in the cabin, you may recall, where he references Pulp Fiction. And I thought it was fun. It's actually one of my favorite scenes. And because Sean and Casper know each other so well, and they actually were really took a lot of self-initiative to rehearse. And when we were setting up lights and stuff, they were always rehearsing. And if it incorporated, say, someone like Sydney Scotia or Alex Zahara, they would do a lot of time rehearsing. And I think they worked off each other really well. So I think at the end of the day, although there was a little bit of frustration about, oh my God, we've just given out the sides and Sean's giving us rewrites and the sides have been delivered. I think at the end of the day, it worked for us. And I think that had I been more like, no, just stick to the dialogue, Sean might have just phoned it in and Casper might have not felt as he was having fun, because a lot of times Casper would be more kind of the comedy guy. So I think at the end of the day, it worked. I think they're both professionals. There's a wrinkle here and there, but I think they're really both professionals. They're very enthusiastic about the film. They were saying they hope to see a part two. We'll have to see how things go. They were even saying, man, this could be maybe a series, but that's kind of wait and see how the film performs.
Did you enjoy directing this movie? Like, is there anything that you learned from directing this movie that you hadn't experienced before?
So I directed Beyond Redemption. I actually directed the last 30% of an Indian movie, which is a story in itself. Directing the Indian movie wasn't that difficult because the cast and crew were really easy to work with. Beyond Redemption was even easier because people like Brian Ho was my lead. Don Liu was one of the main villains. Paul Wu, who's an old friend in the stunt community. They were the leads. And everybody that came on to Beyond Redemption was like I was making a movie with friends. Phil Planta and Theo Kim were two of the producers. They were really good at getting us, pretty much right out of film school people to work for us, so we were able to keep the cost down. But it was a film where we weren't watching the clock so tightly. Everybody was there in front of cameras, essentially working for free, and they loved what they were doing. They were really, I guess, appreciative to do something they don't normally get to do. Like Brian Ho is a fantastic martial artist, stuntman, good-looking young man, but normally he's relegated to, I hate to say it this way, stereotype roles. If he's like playing a role, thug number 7 or something, he'll often double leads. He's doubled Wu Jing, who's one of the biggest actors out of China. He was one of the Power Ranger main doubles for, I believe, Ludi Lin, if memory serves me. But in Beyond Redemption, he got to step up. However, Ruthless Bastards, and you probably have some insight, there were things that I had done on Beyond Redemption, guerrilla shooting. We couldn't do that because of insurance and liability issues and stuff like that. So I couldn't say, let's just take the car out and drive down that road and shoot it. We were also looking at the clock more closely. It's like, you're going to get into OT, right? OT wasn't a concern on Beyond Redemption, so that was a lot different. We did all our paperwork. We did trial by fire for me in terms of final deliveries on Beyond Redemption. But the amount of paperwork, the amount of financing meetings, business plan meetings, like Alex and I did so many Zooms. I know you took part in a few of those, but there were so many meetings with the finance people, with the distributors, with the American buyer. There were so many meetings, and it's quite honest, it was a bit overwhelming. The film in itself, I had fun. There were days that were stressful, but I had fun. And sometimes, I'll be quite honest, it felt like it was different in terms of, say, Beyond Redemption, in that because our crew was so small, I was oftentimes in there holding a sound boom. I didn't do that ever on this. And sometimes I just kind of look around and it's like, wow, there's this universe that's just spinning around me and everything's getting executed. So it was different that way. It was fun. There were some stressful moments. There were some, dealing with personalities. And I've been on enough sets as an observer to see the personality things that can happen. I'm usually pretty easygoing. So I managed to work through it. But, there were a few moments here and there, but nothing that has, giving me any real grief or anything. I'd happily work with anyone, top to bottom, that was on that production, if they'd be willing to work with me, that is.
Well, I don't think there's ever any production that goes 100% smoothly, and there's always little hiccups. And really, a lot of the hiccups come from personalities anyway. I mean, that's we all come into this with a bit fiery and creative personalities, and that's not a corporate environment. It doesn't suit well for hierarchies and for human resource management sometimes. I mean, you're dealing with departments who all have their own agendas. You're dealing with actors who come in with, big personalities. I mean, these are big personality actors that are famous and are well known and are sellable because of the fact that they have these big personalities. I mean, that is part of what you get when you get that kind of a character on set. But it's kind of neat to hear from your perspective how it was different from your first film, but also that you see that. Like, is there anything that you would take from your experience directing Ruthless Bastards that you would take to your next film that you wouldn't have known before you started Ruthless Bastards?
So with the films I've done to date, in each one I kind of would say, okay, I'm going to maybe step back a little bit. Like, for example, on Ruthless Bastard, I stepped back a little bit from the action. Beyond Redemption, I had people like Andrew Chin and Brian Ho and Don Liu doing choreography, but I'd be sitting in there being very thorough about camera angles. As you know, on Ruthless Bastards, there was, of course, Brian, and then we had Stanton Ho, who we kind of were calling the action director on the day. And then we had kind of what we call the action camera unit. Now, that's not exactly how things are done in Hong Kong, but I decided on this case, we're going to do it that way. And then I also found, for example, Thomas Walker. I really liked his work as a DP. And he would come up with shots, and I went, oh, that's beautiful. I don't want to do anything to alter that. And I think I learned a few things, and I'll probably do things a little bit different in subsequent pictures if I'm graced with a subsequent picture, working on it. But I'll probably do things a little bit differently because each project, and I've only done as I call 2.5 movies, the Indian movie that I took over for, but I'll probably do things differently. But I kind of figure that out based on who I'm working with, right? Who's in the team, right? How much experience do I have with them? Do I trust them? Like Brian Ho, I trust him emphatically. I will never have an issue with Brian. I've known Brian since he's 18. In fact, I helped him get his first couple jobs. Anyways, it always depends on the team, and it also depends on what the vision is for this film, or with the subsequent films. But I learned a lot from this. There's certain contract things, like with the case of Sean. In fact, I had lunch with an actor that's here sometimes named Byron Mann, who's an old friend, and we were talking about that sort of thing. He said, yeah, never let them have anything more, less than 72 hours, or ideally they do a table read and they have to make their suggestions then, not, the night before. So that's one of the things, in terms of the contract. There's a few other more legal type things that I learned from this that I would definitely apply. Creatively, I'll probably do things a little different, just because I want to maybe try something different in terms of what I want to achieve, Yeah, but yeah, I learned plenty, but it's every picture is going to be a little different in terms of how I approach.
And for you, obviously love the action film genre. Is that kind of where you want to stay? That's your lane?
Do you know the movie? The movie's American Graffiti, Dazed and Confused?
Yes, love them.
Okay. I have a coming of age film set in the 80s with all of the music, the kind of things that were known in the 80s, the hair, the fashion, the music. And I have a coming of age story, but I'm not the guy to do it yet. I have a view. My view may not be the same as everybody here. It's just my view. But my view is you need to make commercial films. You need to make films that can make money, because ultimately you're spending somebody else's money, an investor. I'm not the one who's going to get money out of telefilm. I'm just not the type they're going to finance. In fact, a lot of stories there, they just don't do commercial action films. I want to do films that make money, that travel, that get seen. I want to try with each film to try to up the level for me as a creative filmmaker in terms of cast, in terms of budget. I actually like all kinds of films. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, you only like action. No, I love all kinds of films. I love classic 1940s films. I love one of my favorite films is Gattaca. There's not an action scene in that film, right? I like a lot of diverse films, but I'm being realistic. I have a skill from my own background in terms of martial arts into stunts into Hong Kong, stunt work here, and I know I can make commercial films. Action films sell. So I also understand what you call bankable names. A distributor wants to hear who is the star. Who are the stars or the bankable names that will sell this movie? And in trying to get my films, I try to find names that sell. So I'm approaching it thinking of commercial action films. I would love to do my 1980s coming of age film, but I know that's not in the cards for me at this time. If, however, I manage to up my level every time and make stuff that's successful commercially, then who knows? Maybe I'll try to do things that aren't action. But at this time, I'm just focused on action.
That's great. And what, in your opinion, makes a commercially viable action movie that isn't like $100 million? Like obviously Ruthless Bastards was made for basically an independent low budget film budget. Like it was definitely not made at even a fraction of what a Hollywood action film would cost.
Yeah, so I didn't get rich on Beyond Redemption, but it made its money back. Didn't really make a huge amount of profit. And there were some problems, another type of story, but the distributors, they had some internal problems in their own company. Just getting paid was a nightmare. But I can say it traveled. It's in 30 odd countries and it provided a stepping stone. And as it is, my current distributors, who I'm quite happy with, because without them, we wouldn't have made this movie, because they got us a pre-sale. They helped us work on the tax credits. We got a company through my distributors to finance the tax credits. So this film is currently going through kind of the sales type thing where they're still working out deals in different countries. We just got sold to Germany and parts of Europe. We've been released on streaming in the States. Canadian deal's still taking shape, but it actually helped us because for another project that we have called Kill Shot, we already have pre-sales. And I think it's partly because, this is from the people that did Ruthless Bastards. They want to do it with this cast. I can't say the cast yet because we haven't secured them, but we have already gotten into some talks with the people we want. Anyways, that Ruthless Bastard actually, like Beyond Redemption, became a stepping stone. It's also a way that when we approach, say, a company like Gersh, which manages some of the talent we're after, they'll be able to say, all right, well, when he approached us before, he only had a micro budget film, but now he's got a proper film with a real cast. And they will, of course, have more respect for that. We're not going to make a major jump. We're not going into like a $50 million budget, maybe another million in increase in our budget, but nothing's like really big. But it helped to provide a stepping stone, right? Ruthless Bastards. And I think if Ruthless Bastards wasn't in place at this moment, I still was just going off Beyond Redemption, we probably wouldn't have the pre-sale interest that we have in this next project.
And then so like what makes Ruthless Bastards sort of that, what sold Ruthless Bastards? Like what were other than the cast? Like you were saying action films sell. What does a good action film need?
Okay, yeah. Sorry, I kind of went off track, didn't I?
No, that's great. That's also great information, by the way.
Well, and this is my experience because when we did Beyond Redemption, we actually literally just we spam mailed a little package and a little teaser trailer to about 45 companies. We had 30 companies get back to us and all make us offers. They were all kind of standard. I learned from that when you have a finished film, you submit it, they'll give you kind of standard things. There's a certain expense cap that they'll have. There's, the sales fees, that kind of thing. So I kind of learned that. The thing that I also learned, unfortunately, like I said, there was a problem with the company that we had put Beyond Redemption with. They split, but there was a sales guy there named Jack. And Jack talked to me a lot after that film. And the one thing that I've learned is genre films sell, action travels. No disrespect to people wanting to make, say, an artistic, dramatic Canadian film, but they don't travel well in terms of they don't sell very well. Unless you get Ryan Gosling in there, they're not going to sell internationally, typically, right? Of course, there's some outliers, but typically they don't travel. Certain genres like action, horror, women in jeopardy thrillers, dog and kid movies, those things actually will travel. They sell well internationally. So the thing with an action film is, one, you want to be realistic. Beyond Redemption was mostly fist fighting and a little bit of gunfighting. Don't put car chases in, because the minute you put in car chases, it's a whole different budget level, because then you have to own the streets. You have to have professional drivers. There's also the insurance will go up. I know very well how to position my film to insurers. Basically, it's actor action, fighting, guns, nothing major. If you want to do an action film, don't put big fire scenes in. Don't blow up too much. If you start blowing up things, if you start setting things on fire, your budget's going to increase. So the smart thing, if you want to do a low budget indie action film, is to focus on the fighting. You got to make the fighting good. In fact, I had a lot of people say, why are you using stunt guys in Beyond Redemption? Why don't you get actors and double them? Well, it's kind of like Hong Kong. Hong Kong basically starts from, I'd rather have a fighter first, Donnie Yen, Jet Li, Jackie Chan, because they didn't start out as actors. They started out as martial artists, as stunt people. So you find those types, put them in a low budget film, try to contain your film, find out everything you can get for free, reverse engineer your film. Don't write the script without thinking about what your resources are. Figure out, what are my resources? What can I do within reason that's not going to suddenly put me into a $30 million budget range? All right. It's impossible. Most people don't realize it. It's very hard to get a film done. And if your budget, your script, and your even the stars you want is unreasonable, it's probably not going to happen. There's certain actors that, maybe they're a little bit more mature, they're past their best before date, they're accessible. They still got to get paid, and they're not going to come in at like a UVCP daily rate, but they could be accessible, and they will actually help you to sell your film, or, as in our case, get you pre-sales, right? So I'd say, if you want to make a tight, low-budget indie film, action, horror, whatever, contain the locations, or locations you can get for free. Try to find lower cost, bankable names. I've got one script. It's kind of like a serious Rush Hour. My reasonable cast would be Scott Adkins and a Hong Kong actor named Andy On, who I've worked with once in the past. That's my reasonable budget one. No disrespect to those actors, but they're not as expensive as my dream cast, which is Jason Statham and Wu Jing. Wu Jing is like the number one guy in China, right? And he did, I think it was called Meg 2 with Jason Statham. They're, to me, like the dream cast, but your budget's going up easily another 20 or 30 million just by their presence. And then if you've got big stars like that, you can't put them in a $1 million film. So if you want to make the perfect indie launch film, keep your budget as low as you can, try as best as you can to get a bankable name. And even if you can't get a bankable name, if you can deliver really good action, there's a distributor out there that'll probably take it. No guarantee you'll make money, but there's probably a distributor out there that'll take it. Did that kind of answer the question?
That definitely did. It sounds like, get those, buy low on the actors. So either at the other side of the crest of their career, like they had a really good career, but they're still looking for work and they want to do some fun projects, but they're not getting the A-list roles, or at the beginning of their career before they're hot, which is a lot harder to predict. It's much easier to take someone that everybody's heard of who hasn't been in a movie for 20 years. And then the action side of things, it sounds like, fist fights and martial arts seems to be, obviously that's something that you're a specialist at, but martial arts seems to be a good, like it shows up well in a trailer kind of thing, because martial arts just, it shoots well.
It's visual.
Yeah, it visually shoots well, and then some gunfighting, which is not that expensive, actually. I mean, it's, even if you want to use, squibs and not go totally visual effects with it all, it can still look pretty good, and you can do it on a low enough budget to still make it look good. Because the real key is that if you're going to have fight sequences, I mean, from what you're telling me, if you're going to have fight sequences, make the fights good. Like they have to be the good part.
Yeah. Well, and this is part of the thing that I found separated Hong Kong, and it has changed in recent times. They would actually put a lot of time into a fight scene. I worked for Jackie Chan on a film called Operation Condor. We would literally spend days on an action sequence. When they covered the dialogue, they'd of course get coverage, but they wouldn't get excessive coverage. I've been on TV shows where they'll spend the whole day getting dialogue scenes, which I understand it's important, but they're just getting so much coverage. And then they go, we really ran out of time. We only have an hour to film this fight. So if you kind of work it that way, and this is, say, like your dream little independent action film, and you spend most of your time getting coverage of dialogue instead of maybe just saying, I only need these two angles. That's all I'm going to use. And I'll put more time on the action. You're going to compromise, right? So my advice would be make sure you give enough time to the action. An hour isn't enough to do a fight. I actually have been in some big arguments because I've had other films in the past that say, we want Bruce to direct all the fights. Now, this is back in the past. And I'd be arguing with DPs. I'd be, production people go, you're going to spend like 6 hours doing a fight? I'm like, that 6 hours is kind of light in comparison to Asia. But it depends on how you're trying to sell the movie. Beyond Redemption, we weren't doing Shakespeare. Beyond Redemption was a micro budget film. I made it for 45K. I had a lot of help. We knew we were going to sell it because of the action. There's no way I would get, say, an actor who couldn't do action and expect him to deliver like Brian Ho or Don Liu. I'm sorry, there are no actors in this city that can move like Brian Ho or Don Liu. They don't exist, right? There are a lot of very good actors, Asian Canadians, otherwise, they're certainly good actors, but a lot of times actors are not trained to do martial arts. So sometimes you got to think, all right, can I groom like they did with Donnie Yen, Jackie Chan, and Jet Li? Can I groom these people to be good actors or stars? So I'd say if you want to make a low budget action, focus on can they deliver the action. If they can deliver the acting too, fantastic, right? But the priority, I would say, make it, if you're trying to sell an action film, make it be the action.
That's fantastic. And the thing is that you know, Beyond Redemption is a Canadian action film. It does seem to take place in Canada. Ruthless Bastards is a little more agnostic country-wise, but it is a Canadian action film. This is not something that Canadian films are known for. You were mentioning about, the more traditional Canadian film is a little more art film, a little more drama and things like that. So this is a little bit of self-interest here, but is a Canadian action film a good sell, or does it have sellability just by the fact that you call it a Canadian action film? Like obviously Hong Kong, if you say Hong Kong action film, people are like, okay, good, I like that. And sometimes even an American action film, people will be like, okay, yeah, we can think about that. But Canadian action films, that seems almost like an oxymoron in some ways.
Fair enough. So, I am supportive of anybody who wants to do an independent film. I know how hard it is. You know how hard it is. And whatever they want to do, I wish them luck. Maybe what they create isn't my cup of tea, but I support their initiative. I support their drive. I know the struggle. And if they go anywheres with it, I certainly tip my hat. My philosophy is looking at commercial films that do well internationally, certain genres like action horror, as we mentioned, sell. I want to focus on action because that's what I know. When I send it out into the world, to be honest, I'm not trying to say this is Canadian. My next film, I want to have even more Canadian elements without saying it's actually Canadian, right? What I'm trying to do is simply put out an action film. I want as much Canadian in it as I can get, but I don't think I need to say this is Canadian, if you know what I'm saying. Like there's nothing in Ruthless Bastards that this is Canadian. Beyond Redemption actually kind of works. And I actually read a review of one guy who said, this is one of the cases where Canada doesn't have to be Seattle because Canada is known, especially Vancouver, as having a very diverse population, Chinese Canadian. We actually have a project that we're working on right now that's set in Surrey, that's kind of Indian atomic blonde. And it works because we have a huge Indian community, right? Beyond Redemption worked because we have a very large Chinese community. Much of Beyond Redemption was shot around basically Richmond and Chinatown, right? And it works because there is the Chinese Canadian universe, right? My wife's Chinese. I spent many years in Asia. I live in Richmond. It has its own little universe. So it actually works. Vancouver, Chinese community, it works internationally. Ruthless Bastards, it's kind of vague where it is, right? And I think as a product, I don't think I have to push we're Canadian. As a filmmaker, I want it to be as Canadian as possible. In fact, I can't disclose whom, but my next project, we want to have a soundtrack, like pop music, stuff that makes you reminiscent or nostalgic or sets the vibe. And I've entered into some talks with some Canadian pop music people. And for the identity of the film, they're not going to think it's Canadian because some of this music has actually traveled very well. It's heard in all over the world. And when you hear it, you go, oh, I remember that song. In fact, I spoke to one of the artists. A lot of people think we're from the UK because it's got kind of that 80s kind of synth vibe. But I think it works very well for the film. But I want to put in as much Canadian elements as I can. This film, the next one, will be kind of a First Blood homage. So I want to put in as much that is Canadian, but I don't want to be in the face of this is Canadian because my real goal is to sell the film, to make a commercial film that I hope travels, sells internationally. I will put in as much, say, Hollywood cast to sell the film, but any other roles in the film, I want them to be Canadian. I got to be honest, the Kung Fu TV series shot here, I personally thought it was offensive in that we have so many good Chinese Canadian actors, actresses, stunt people living here in Vancouver. I know that because a lot of them supported me on Beyond Redemption. And if you look at the cast of the Kung Fu TV series, they're predominantly from the USA. Now, no disrespect to them as actors, actresses, professionals. I respect them as that, but they didn't need to come up here. They're not a name that's selling the show. It's just that Hollywood stereotype. Oh, we'll get all our people out of LA because we really don't think the Canadians are good enough or whatever the rationale is. But I thought it was offensive. You've got a show, Kung Fu, shot here in Vancouver that is almost entirely an Asian cast, and our locals are getting the small bits. You know what I'm saying? My idea is I want to, except for the people that actually move the sales needle, right? The bankable names. And I don't care if they're from the Hollywood or from Hong Kong or India or whatever. If they move the sales needle, we'll bring them in, right? Because that will enable us to get the film done. The rest, I want to be as Canadian as possible, top to bottom. And like I said, this next film, I'm trying to get some deals because music costs a lot of money, but I want to try to get some music that will really add to the experience of the film. And, we wanted to have that 80s action movie vibe. So we're doing that. And my policy will be, I just want to get Canadian artists.
Well, and speaking of that, this kind of leads to that. One of the reasons why it's really good timing to have you on here is that you mentioned earlier that we're still working out the Canadian release of the film, but there is going to be a screening of the film in March. So why don't we talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So Ruthless Bastards, as we all probably know, the people that are listening, this is an independent film. Independent film is always a struggle. When you're making commercial independent film, you're typically not going to get too much support in terms of the financing, as we've talked about. We are doing potentially, because there's some other deals that are going on behind the scenes right now, and I can't really disclose too much, but with the current setup that we have, the plan is to do this screening at the Rio on March 23rd, open to the public, to create a little buzz, because we have quite a large streaming deal that's being in discussion. And the discussion is that maybe a limited theatrical for Canada would be actually in order, because I don't know if people understand this, but streamers typically pay more money for a film that's released theatrically than they do for a straight to video type film. And so the discussion is, oh, let's do a limited theatrical, and no disrespect to any of our cast, but we are targeting essentially the Indo-Canadian communities, because the gentleman that we haven't really discussed too much, Parmesh Verma, is our lead villain. Parmesh, actually, he's a pop star in India. He's had about 9 theatrical films. He's currently got a web series streaming in India that's had about 11 million views since it just started. And it's actually something I've been saying since the beginning, but I think now the distribution people are all kind of seeing the light. So we're looking at potentially a limited theatrical targeting because of Parmesh's presence in the film, and many of his scenes are in Punjabi. But we're looking at a targeted release in, say, places like Strawberry Hill in Surrey, Brampton, which has a large Indo-Canadian community, maybe also Calgary, Alberta, because those are places typical for Punjabi type films or Indian films in general. So there's discussion about that, about doing a limited theatrical, and our Rio is just kind of a more of a public one because, as you might recall, we did do a cast and crew screening. Of course, it was well attended, cast and crew and a lot of guests. But this one will be public, and then we're hoping to get some critics in, some influencer types, and just hoping to create a bit of a buzz before we go forward and do the potential limited theatrical.
Fantastic. Yeah, and that's March 23rd at the Rio at 8:30 p.m.
Yeah, show starts 8:30. Yeah, come in early, 8 o'clock, but show starts. And on their website, you can also buy tickets in advance.
Yeah. And the key here is that, and this is one of the things with regards to independent film, is when we have theatrical releases, it's so important to get people out to those early screenings because that defines how that release might happen. Whether or not it happens, even on a limited level, how effective that limited release is can depend on a lot of these early screenings, especially like a Rio screening. If there's a lot of buzz around it, maybe that helps propel it to other markets within Canada and gets that buzz out the door.
Very, very important. In fact, the one thing I would say, it's time for Canadian filmmakers, and this is just my own little rant, to try to elevate what we do. And I support and have nothing against art film, but I think as a whole, I think the community should try to support the people attempting to make commercial films, because it's actually such that if you're making a commercial film, suddenly people or government entities aren't so willing to support. There's a lot of support for the art side, and I'm not saying don't support that. What I'm saying is we should support any kind of independent Canadian film. We should collectively try to elevate what we do. We have very good crews. We have very good production people. We have tons of in front of camera talent, but we don't make a lot of independent film here. We don't make stuff that is, say, CBC or CTV or, that kind of little infrastructure. It is so hard to get an independent film done, and it is so hard to get it out there into the world. And I think we should try to support all people who make film, but let's try to also help the people that make commercial film. Because, a lot of people think, oh, you're making a commercial. It's not the same. If you're not Hollywood, there's a different infrastructure, right? The studios and what have you. So, I just think the unions and all these entities should kind of reassess the way they approach things, because I think it's really not set up in a way that's conducive. As we can tell, sometimes Hollywood takes breaks, recessions, strikes, someone in a different part of the world offers better tax credits, and then all of a sudden the local industry is hurting. So we should be nurturing all of the Canadian independent film industry, not just the ones that typically get funded by Telefilm that are making artistic endeavors. I support that. I have nothing against that. I've gone to many of those persons' films. I support them. But the support doesn't seem to go towards commercial stuff.
And we need both.
That's my rant.
No, that's a good rant, because I remember a time where, you might go to a comedy one week, you might go to see a drama that was like an Oscar contender another week, you might go to see an action film because, especially in the 80s when Schwarzenegger and Stallone and, all these guys, Bruce Willis and all these guys were coming in and making these films, you could find an action movie every week to go and see. But then, your next week, you might go and see a really nice, well-made drama. There's no competition here. It's not like you're doing one at the expense of another. You can actually go to see 2 movies in a weekend if you choose to. I mean, it doesn't have to be just one. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And I think that is something where, as an industry, we work in this industry, and I hear from people all the time who say, "Oh, I really want to work on more like independent films." And there's a cost to making independent film, to working on independent films, because one, you have to take a bit of a pay cut to work on an independent film. That's one. You're not getting your usual rate on that. But then the second part is that in order for those things to keep being made, we have to go and actually watch them when they're finished, because that's ultimately the goal, is to buy the product when it's finished, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. Well, I only have a couple more questions, and this has been really helpful. First one is, you're a producer, you're a director, you're a stunt coordinator, you've been an actor, you've been a fight choreographer. Which hat feels most like you?
Filmmaker, that i.e. directing, producing. If my game plan works, I hope to help produce other things, not necessarily directing. I have a particular idea, I might be right, might be wrong, of what I think will work commercially. And I want to helm the projects that I have in mind. But eventually I want to produce as well, help other films get realized, ideally commercial. But I generally say I'm a filmmaker. I want to direct first and foremost. I also want to produce because I realize if I don't do it myself, it's not going to happen. I obviously I get people, in the past, Phil Planta, Theo Kim on Beyond Redemption, couldn't have done Ruthless Bastards without Alex and Y and of course yourself. And sometimes the teams will change just subject to availability and so on. But yeah, I'm a filmmaker and I've got projects I'm pushing and I will direct and produce. And eventually I hope to be producing, working with other, creative minded director producer types.
Fantastic. And then, so one final question. If there's a Ruthless Bastards 2, what does that look like?
So Sean and Casper, one of the things that we can help you get some bigger names because they're smart guys. They're professionals. So I have the feeling it will be a collaborative thing. Who's in that? I honestly have no idea. I've got literally a dozen finished scripts, a dozen treatments. My friend Verinder and a few other people, we kept busy during COVID. I just said, I'm going to make content. And I've got stuff that's not what I think conventional average Caucasian Canadians would come up with. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but I've got stuff that's targeting Indian markets, China markets, or just international markets, a combination thereof, et cetera. So I'm just more focused on those at the moment. I'm realistic in that I want to see how Ruthless Bastards does. Right now, we're doing well in terms of the business plan worked out. We're in the black. We still have money owed to us, but if we get everything paid off, we'll be in the black. But I don't want to forecast Ruthless Bastards too much yet. I have some ideas, but I've got my other projects. I've got Kill Shot that the pre-sales are looking pretty good. We're talking to a pretty big company about a film called Illegal Weapon. That's the Atomic Blonde type thing. We've got another one called Unstoppable, which is also, we actually have an Indo-Canadian star that wants to do it. I've got something focused on China because some of my old friends have kind of gone up the ranks, so to speak, in Hong Kong and Southeast Asia. So we're trying to collaborate on something. So Ruthless Bastards, I'd like there to be a 2, but I'm not really thinking about it too much because I got a whole bunch of other things on my plate.
Yeah, you can only direct one film at once.
Yeah. But you know what? Engineering them, you can be multitasking.
Well, Bruce, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. I already have my ticket to the Rio, so I'm excited to go and bring as many people as I can to see the film. And just from having worked on the film, I can say that it was one of the most fun experiences I've had, even though, again, there were lots of challenges. But I think the team that made that film was such a great group of people. From top to bottom, it was such a fun group to come to work with every day. And I'm excited because the film is good and the people who worked on it are good. And I feel like that in and of itself just makes it something that has to be championed even more.
Thank you. And I would just add, maybe I didn't mention it previously, Ruthless Bastards, I can say, look, I got it started, I created, I got the star cast. It would be nowhere without the team. And it's the same thing for the first film I did, Beyond Redemption. Without the team I had, that film would have been nowhere. And I think one of the most important things for filmmakers is getting that team. And I was very blessed on Ruthless Bastards and Beyond Redemption to have the team that I did. And, independent film, when you don't have a lot of money, you need the team. And if you've got a good team, you can move mountains.
That's great. Thanks again, Bruce.
You're welcome.
Okay, so that's it for this week's episode of Off the Lot. We want to hear from you. If there are any topics you want covered or any questions you'd like answered, please email us at podcast.offthelot@gmail.com.
You can also find us on Instagram and YouTube. Our handles are in the show notes. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. And share this with your friends. See you next week.